Welcome to the Co-Creative Sessions, your access point for knowledge and expertise from artists, creatives, changemakers, designers, entrepreneurs, and community enthusiasts in the South Coast and beyond.
Whether you know it or not, your environment does play a big role in your work.
I'd recommend anytime you find something that's really effective, break it down.
The idea is to get started today. Avoid overthinking it.
The Co-Creative Sessions is funded by Mass Development TDI and the Barr Foundation as part of the TDI Creative Cities Initiative to boost arts-based economic development. This program is also supported in part by a grant from the New Bedford and Dartmouth Local Cultural Councils, local agencies which are supported by the Mass Cultural Council, a state agency. And now, the Co-Creative Sessions.
And thank you for joining us for the latest entry in the Co-Creative Sessions. I'm Scott Bishop. I'll be moderating tonight's session. Stace Brandt is an interdisciplinary arts writer. They are the co-director and co-curator of Very, an artist-run gallery and exhibition space in the South End of Boston. Stace's writing has appeared in print and online publications, including Art New England, Big Red and Shiny, and WMN Zine. Their most recent work surrounds creative content and narrative strategies for independent artists and organizations, taking the form of funding proposals, curatorial statements, web design, and more. If you have any questions for Stace, we'll be taking them after the presentation. You're also welcome to drop your questions into the chat, and we'll compile those questions and ask them after the presentation. And now, here's Stace.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming here. I'm trying to get myself, okay, now I can see myself and all of you. Thank you, Dina, as well, and kind of the whole co-creative team for allowing me to speak and kind of share some ideas that have been floating around in my head for quite a while now. So yeah, I'm an interdisciplinary arts writer out of Boston, and I sort of came up with that title for myself to kind of cover everything that I do. Over the past 7 years, I've sort of worn a lot of different hats in the art world, and I'm also a musician as well, so that's sort of encapsulated in my writing practice. But so yeah, over the past 7 years or so, I've become the sort of handyman for artists and art organizations, and currently I co-direct and co-curate an artist-run gallery and exhibition space out of Boston. And that's been a lot of sort of curatorial work and sort of conceptualizing exhibitions from start to finish, exhibition planning, working with artists. I also write grants for an arts nonprofit out of New York, and that's, a lot of funding proposals and sort of best positioning the organization to receive funding. In the past, I've worked in art appraising and art dealing. I've worked with collectors. I've kind of seen how art moves through public and private spaces as well. And I've been sort of more of a straightforward art journalist. I've done exhibition reviews and artist profiles and the like. So a kind of smorgasbord of experiences there. But what's really gotten me thinking about this idea of writing about your own work is working one-on-one, recently working one-on-one with independent artists to sort of help better articulate or communicate their ideas and exactly what it is that they do. So, in creating this workshop, I've kind of tried to demystify and deconstruct my own writing process to sort of be able to share tools with you all and other artists. And as an artist myself, it's really helpful as well. That will lead, tools that will lead to more successful writing. And, writing, I feel like is one of the most prevalent forms of communication that we have, but also the most powerful. And, in the context or frame of this workshop, writing is powerful for us as artists because we really do have the capacity to shape and direct and guide our viewers' attention and perception of our work. So this idea of writing as communication, like what actually is the point of communication? And I think, the point of communication is really to facilitate understanding. and taking that one step further, you know, what's the point of understanding? I think that, you know, ultimately through understanding, we're trying to create connections, and in this case, you know, creating connections between yourself and your work and the audience, but also yourself and your work. So I'm going to share my screen. So yeah, these sort of connections or lines of understanding that I was just talking about, you know, I think as, you know, this is sort of meant to show the interplay or the dance between these kind of three entities. And I think when we're writing about our work, thinking about all of these different connections is really important. You know, I think sometimes as artists, we kind of have this instinct to make a work and then sort of run away from it when we present it to the public. So, you know, kind of letting the audience or the viewer bring their own interpretations to the table and sort of figure it out for themselves. But I actually think while that's sort of a totally valid thing to do, I think that the more that we can actually support the viewer and kind of support them in knowing exactly what it is that we do and why it's important, the more likely it is that that person's going to sort of support you in return. And whether that person's, you know, a gallerist, a curator, a friend, a family, like, I think that this sort of like supportive nature and sort of welcoming the viewer into what we do is just so important to kind of advancing our careers. And whether advancing our careers, you know, that kind of sounds intimidating, but, you know, whether that's just selling one painting all the way up to receiving grant funding or even a museum show, you know, again, the more that we can kind of support the viewer by giving them the tools to understand what we do, the more they're going to support us in return. And so I have been thinking about this idea of understanding a lot. And, you know, people actually, you know, need to understand. And when you don't understand something, I feel like, you know, people tend to sort of push it away in a sense. And I think it becomes sort of this alienating experience. So I think we can kind of all agree that the art world is intimidating enough as it is. It's gate kept enough as it is. So the more that we can sort of welcome the viewer in through our writing, kind of making our work accessible, you know, that's, I think that's sort of the goal here. So that's sort of addressing the connection between you and the audience and your work. But there's also this really important line of understanding between you and your own work. And I think this is something that's really overlooked. You know, I think that when we go as artists, when we go to sort of write about our work, we're staring at this horrifying blank page. And we feel like maybe we need to know what we're going to say before we say it. But on the contrary, I think that writing is actually a way of sort of developing ideas in real time. You know, words are so amazingly evocative and fluid and creative and interchangeable that the more that we can kind of embrace that aspect of writing, the more that we can really sort of view the writing process as more of a creative process. You know, the more fluidity we're going to have in our practice, you know, the less we're going to be stagnating in the same thought cycles, which I don't know if you've had this experience, but maybe somebody asked you to write something 5 years ago and it sort of follows you throughout your career and it never is updated or evolved. So I think that's kind of important to start to reconceptualize the writing process as artists. So I actually want to talk about this connection between the audience and your work first. And I wanted to start out with this idea of anchoring the reader, and more specifically, anchoring the reader in the physical reality of your work. So, you know, we interact with art so much in a digital space. in today's day and age. We're on websites, whether it's our own or somebody else's. We apply for grants through, digital application portals. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, etc. And that is always involving this sort of translation between the physical, actual, in-person reality of your work into this sort of digital realm, into videos and digital images, and inevitably, like the physical and sensory experience is sort of getting lost in that translation. And so again, writing, the writing accompanying this, these translations is so important to sort of recouping what is lost. So anchoring the reader. So what do I mean by this? I wanted to show you this image that NASA released a few years ago, and it's kind of a beautiful image, and I want us to sort of all think about being here in this landscape, and maybe NASA sort of we're a photographer, and NASA sort of hired us to go here for a specific purpose. But before I get into this purpose, we want to share this experience with someone who's kind of on the other side of the world in another time zone, potentially. And we would really love to FaceTime them, but we don't have enough service. So we can squeak in a phone call, and we're sort of forced to describe what's in front of us without the other person seeing it. And so the question is, what would we point out about this landscape? Well, we might start out with the fact that it's nighttime, and that might be sort of an obvious thing to point out, but it's so important to sort of immediately anchor the viewer in what we're seeing. We might go on to sort of point out the multiplicity of stars in the sky. We might talk about this kind of silhouetted tree line that's being reflected into this lake or river, which is also reflecting, the night sky and constellations. We might talk about standing on this riverbank, kind of looking out onto the horizon. We're kind of picking out what's in front of us, what's actually there, what's visually going to anchor the reader or the viewer in our work. And again, it's obvious, but it's so important to sort of grounding and centering what we're looking at it. So the reason why NASA sent us here was to take a picture of Orion's belt being reflected here in the foreground. And my point here is that, the why is important, and it sort of helps deepen our understanding of what's going on here, but it's not the full picture. There's so much more to look at. There's so much more impact, immediate impact, when we're sort of in this landscape. So, another way of saying anchoring the viewer in our work is kind of situating the viewer. So if we think of our art as almost like a hike or a walk in the woods, writing would be sort of akin to a trail map. So it's not a replacement for the experience, but it's sort of a guide. It's a navigational tool to sort of get from point A to point B. And so the question really is, how do we create these pathways? How do we create these guides so that the viewer doesn't really get lost in the woods, so to speak? And we're able to sort of guide the viewer to our core meaning. And of course, there could be many pathways to the same point, but the question is how. And so that's kind of the almost the meat of what I want to talk about today. Is this idea of how exactly to write about your own work. And well, I think it starts with this sort of fundamental connection between you and your work. And again, the more that we can sort of conceptualize the writing process as a creative process, the more fluidity is going to come, the deeper the understanding you are going to sort of create between your work, which is so important. So reconceptualizing the writing process as a creative one, I'm going to kind of use this metaphor of making a painting, and making a painting in a traditional sense. And so, when you go to make a painting in the traditional sense, there's preparation involved. You don't just put paint onto the canvas and that's it. You kind of have to, stretch your canvas, sand it, prime it, collect materials, gather materials and tools. And so I would liken this part of the writing process as sort of like the brainstorming step. And it's so important not only to sort of get your brain started, sort of jumpstart the process, but, it's about really gathering the information. So you're mixing your colors, you're mixing your palette, you're gathering words and phrases and commentary and critique and observations that maybe you've made or other people have made in the past. And again, I would sort of liken this to your palette, and maybe not all the colors sort of show up in your final painting, but at least you have them there. At least you're sort of prepared and you're not sort of starting off from nothing. So I wouldn't underestimate this preparatory phase. So I do have some ideas, and let me actually move myself out of the way here so I can see. So some ideas to get started here in the brainstorming phase. One, I would say just simply making a list. Don't underestimate the power of a list. And this is something that I do pretty much every time that I start a piece of writing. And whether this is in my notes app, in my phone, whether this is in a Google Doc, a Word doc, or a physical notebook. Again, it's just about gathering and sort of getting an intuitive sense of what you want to say. And this could be descriptive words. This could even be a sort of research phase where you find clips of different art writing or artist statements that you sort of like in the past. But it's just about collection. The only rule here really is to not censor yourself, is to sort of gather as much information as possible, so that you have it in front of you kind of at the ready. The second idea, which I think is extraordinarily useful, it might take a little bit more time than making a list. The list exercise could be 5 minutes, 20 minutes, what have you. But recording yourself talking about your work is an amazing way to get a sense of what you want to say. I find a lot of times when I work with artists, I have a lot easier time talking about their work to me, sort of verbalizing it to me than writing about it. And whether it's probably because it's two different, neural pathways in the brain. But, when you're kind of speaking about your work, one, really crucially, it's coming from the I, it's coming from you. And, we don't want your art writing to be sort of interchangeable with somebody else's. We want it to be authentic and accurate and specific. And so when you're speaking from the I, you're kind of automatically getting that. And so when whether you're recording with just a friend or a group of people, obviously tell them you're recording so you don't get sued down the line. But when you go to transcribe this conversation later on, you'll find that there are words and phrases and even full sentences that will translate directly into an artist statement or bio, etc., whatever you're going out to write about your work. And again, these are like really core, authentic pieces of information that, coming from the I will totally sort of, again, like anchor your work in what you're writing. So I would highly recommend that. I think it would be totally fruitful, really for anyone, any one of you to sort of take that on. The third idea that I would suggest, and it's a bit more of a poetic idea, I would say, is to answer this question of what you want your work to feel like. what do you want your work to convey? What sort of emotional impact do you want your work to have on the audience? And this is sort of speaking to the intentionality of your work, your intention as the artist, how you want your work to come across. And I would say the key here is to be really descriptive. For instance, I've worked with a lot of artists that would tell me that they would want their work to convey beauty. And I would say, beauty is kind of non-descriptive, and it's an opinion. And we kind of want to get behind exactly, an emotional state, sort of, we want to get beyond the beauty, beyond sort of stagnant words like good or bad. We want to sort of get into the meat of what you want to say. So those are some brainstorming ideas. I think they're all totally valid. The next way that I think that writing relates to this creative process or the process of making a painting is this idea of drafting. And, traditionally when you go to make a painting, you're not going straight for this sort of super polished, super refined look. We start with an underdrawing, like you could see here, and build up layers and get more and more refined and sort of shape it and construct it as you go along to get this sort of more direct look. And so, I would liken this underdrawing phase, I would liken this sort of sketch to a first draft. And you're not not really going for accuracy here. You're going for to sort of get the gesture of what you want to say. It's an approximation. And as you go through draft 2, 3, and even 4 and beyond, you start to sort of refine, you can start to sort of shape and rearrange. And I guess the overarching idea here is that, drafting takes time. And I would really recommend that, you're leaving at least a night's sleep between drafts, because 10 out of 10 times, even if I feel like I've perfected a piece of writing, the next day when I reapproach it, I will see something that I want to change. And I think it's actually more efficient to sort of do it this way rather than trying to bust out 3 drafts in the same night, because, you're not getting that same freshness. You're not getting the same fresh eyes. All right. So kind of bear with me here. This is a kind of more conceptual idea that is also related to still life painting, and some of you might recognize this, but it's this idea of defamiliarizing. So there's this idea in painting, or in still life painting, or painting from life, that in order to sort of capture the true likeness of an object in an authentic way, it helps to sort of defamiliarize. And to kind of explain what I mean, so if I was going to draw this sort of coffee mug with or paint this coffee mug with this cute little puppy on it, and I just kept sort of saying to myself, coffee mug, coffee mug, coffee mug, and sort of name it and allow my preconceived notions of what a coffee mug is and is supposed to look like into sort of my mental space, chances are I'm not going to capture this mug very accurately. However, on the contrary, if I sort of start to break down this mug and start to look at the very specific shape that the sort of negative space is making, and the specific curve of this handle, and maybe I don't even think about it as a handle anymore. I think about the very specific colors and tonalities here. Chances are I'm going to sort of portray it with a lot more accuracy, and it's sort of the essence of what I'm seeing in front of me. This is a very specific environment, very specific time of day, very specific object. So if we sort of translate this idea into our work, it's kind of this idea of taking a step back and seeing our work for really what it is and how it's coming across to the viewer. Again, this idea of developing empathy and the more we can see our works as collection of materials, of shapes, of forms, of symbols, of colors, the more likely it is that we're going to portray it with accuracy, with authenticity, and sort of not make it into this cliche, for lack of a better word. So another way of saying this in a more simplified manner, and I think Eva's on, and thank you, Eva, for bringing this up to me. So defamiliarize and stating it in another way would be making the known unknown. And so again, it's this idea of kind of taking a step back from your work to sort of see it in a new light. And the more that we can kind of see our works as not something that's really like attached to us at the hip, but as something that is kind of an autonomous being, something that can really be interacting with, an audience or a viewer without us being there, the more that we'll sort of be able to develop this new perspective and to be able to write about it more freely. We can kind of see our work as almost this like document, but also a sort of living document. So, as we evolve as artists, as time sort of goes on, our work is going to accrue new meaning, accumulate new meaning. We'll be able to sort of see it in a new light. And so kind of as we evolve as artists, our work evolves too. And we want our writing to reflect that. Like, we want it to be able to be flexible. There's always a new angle to look at your work from, again, not really stagnating in the same ideas, not looking at your work as something that sort of has like an exhausted meaning, but something that's sort of alive, a sort of living thing in a way. I wanted to sort of present this visual that I made that I think encapsulates the sort of three elements that those connections between you and your work, you and the audience, and the audience and your work, and also encapsulates sort of the components of sort of what your work is doing as an object, as an experience, etc. And then, so I'm going to take you through the worksheet and then try to sort of show you how writing might emerge from this exercise. And again, it's like a bit of a conceptual exercise here, but I think it might be helpful. So I'm going to sort of take you through the lay of the land here. We have these kind of three regions, the what, the sort of unidentified middle region, and the why. And sorry, my Zoom thing keeps being funky. So I'm going to start with the what region, and I kind of intentionally put this anchor here in the bottom right hand corner to refer back to this idea of anchoring the reader in the physical experience, the in-person experience of our work. Kind of what the immediate impact, what is visually shown, what is actually there. So I've represented the what region, the sort of grounded, sort of grounded gravity region, with this kind of cement slab rectangle here, again, meant to sort of convey weight, gravity, materiality. So this would be, what genre are you working in? Very simply, what are your materials? And then those kind of physical immediate observations. So what can you notice? What could anyone notice about your work on first glance? So that's a sort of very important place to start, I think. And then we have the why. And the why is sort of represented by these floating balloons almost. And it's meant to sort of represent the more conceptual reason, the conceptual region and sort of ideas behind your work. So something that the viewer could not see upon sort of immediately approaching your work for the first time. So that the why is really answering this question of like, why do you do what you do in the first place? Why you make art? And these could be, your intentions, your explorations, your influences, your motivations, the emotions behind your work. So again, the sort of unseen idea conceptual realm. And then we have this sort of middle region that is kind of interesting. To me, it's the most interesting. And it's this sort of connection point between the two regions, between the what and the why. And I think in writing, this is kind of where things get clarified in a way. And I'm going to call it the tension. And it's kind of the most difficult and challenging to fill out, but again, potentially the most fruitful. And I'll kind of show you what I mean. So I'm literally representing this tension by these sort of tethers. So the what is sort of tethering the why down to the earth in a sense. And again, this is kind of just a visual to sort of facilitate understanding, but you could also think about this as kind of like a Venn diagram, and where it's sort of the why and the what intersecting in this sort of middle region of tension. So I'm gonna take you through how I would fill out this worksheet with a piece of work that I created. And I want everyone to imagine that this is a painting, an oil painting on canvas. And so I kind of want to go through the what first. I think that's probably the best place to start. I feel like that's sort of what, again, is sort of anchoring or grounding the viewer to your work, that sort of immediate impact. So I'm going to kind of go through it and start to point out kind of what I see as these elements of the what. So I'm seeing two people sitting here at a table. They appear to be in some sort of interior space that's kind of sparsely decorated. There's a window here. You can't really see what's outside. It's kind of gray and opaque. This table in between the two figures is casting this kind of shadow on the ground. The two people have sort of longish hair, which might lead me to believe that they're women or female identifying people. One of these figures has gray hair and one has a sort of yellowish hair. So maybe I could make the assumption that one is older and one is younger, but I'm not entirely sure. The figures kind of seem to be resembling each other, so potentially they're related, but I can't make that assumption for sure. In terms of the palette, I'm seeing that there's kind of this like blue, gray, black, yellow, like this pop of yellow here, kind of a flat palette, if you will, kind of cooler colors, and that's kind of it. That's that's kind of the extent of what I would put in the what here. So I would kind of just fill it out. So working in painting, more specifically portraiture. My materials that I'm working with are oil paint, brushes, and canvas, and then these immediate physical observations. So there's two people kind of sitting facing each other, and they're in a room, and there's a window and kind of sparse decor. The people, we might think they're women. They have longish hair. One kind of looks older, younger, and it's possible that they're related. So that's kind of it. And despite the fact that I, as a as the artist, have so much background information on these people, who they are, where they are, etc., memories, emotions associated with it. I'm really just focused on kind of taking a step back and identifying what exactly is there. What could anybody see in this work? So now I'm going to kind of hop over to the why. And the reason that I make paintings is to explore intergenerational relationships, trauma, and the process of aging. So that's kind of what I'm exploring in my painting, what sort of brings me to paint. So we kind of have these two really crucial regions, and now I'm going to address this third component, which is kind of again the most challenging, but it's kind of where the most interesting, in my opinion, the most interesting ideas happen, because again, it's this bridge between the what and the why. And I wanted to sort of reiterate that, like, in your work, all of these components are operating in harmony at the same time. They're not sort of separate. But I think it's kind of helpful to see them separated, to start to then move into the writing process. And I'll do that in just a bit. So I'll start out with kind of two crucial pieces of information that I think are, as the artist, crucial to understanding this painting. So this is actually a portrait of myself and my mother, and we are in my childhood home. And so I'm going to throw those in this sort of tension area. And the reason being that, despite the fact that I might have been, tempted to put this in the what, these aren't things that just an average everyday viewer is going to know upon sort of looking at my painting immediately. So myself and my mother, and we're in my childhood home. And so this element is relating directly to the two people that are sitting there. It's the viewer can see sort of who these people are now. And then it's connected to the why in terms of this idea of intergenerational relationships. And my childhood home is maybe relating to this process of aging. So we can kind of see how they're connected to both of these regions at once. And again, crucial information to understanding this painting, information that I would want to provide with a viewer to help better understand, where I'm coming from, where this painting is coming from. So if I sort of keep going through this, maybe I start to look at this relationship between the two figures, a sort of formal relationship. And I start to get interested. And again, this is my perspective as the artist. Like, these are the things that really interest me. This isn't about, the viewer at this point. So something that's interesting to me is this relationship between the two figures, this sort of who that are separated by this table. And this table is sort of, to me, taking on almost like its own life as a barrier between these two figures. So, maybe this idea starts to emerge as I'm looking at my work, that, this sort of physical barrier, this physical separation is becoming this almost symbolic gesture that's separating the two figures. So maybe it's sort of translating into the emotional realm. Like, despite the fact that this is mother and child, they're kind of supposed to have this close bond, despite the fact that they're in the same room with each other, there is this barrier between them. And so maybe this idea that, like, physical distance and emotional distance is sort of happening at the same time here is one that's interesting to me. So I'll jot it down in the tension section. So, we can see that the two figures are sort of separated from each other, which is relating to the what. And then this emotional distance that's happening is sort of relating to the why, potentially relating to this trauma, potentially relating to intergenerational relationships. But again, it's sort of bridging the gap. We could go even further. This is meant to, again, be a sort of brainstorming exercise to sort of get us started. So we might talk about the palette being kind of like cool or cold, potentially a stand-in for a lack of emotional warmth here. Might talk about this. I might talk as the artist about this sort of shadow, which might be sort of ghostly or ominous. I might sort of start to get interested in the dynamic between these two figures. There's this sort of symmetry happening. There's this two-ness happening. There's potentially like a duality happening. Two sides are sort of facing each other. And again, I'm kind of just riffing off my own ideas here. So, they're facing each other, they're reflecting each other. There's almost this mirroring effect. And again, as I sort of talk myself through this, I'm starting to sort of find what my interests are in my own work. And these are the things that are really going to start to appear in this intermediary region between the what and the why. So, and as you fill it out, you're going to sort of notice this almost like blurring effect where things in the tension could also exist in the what, or things that are found in the tension could also exist in the why. And that's great. Again, these regions or components are all existing at once in harmony in your work. So for instance, with this sort of idea of a cold or cool palette, that's something that could have been pointed out in the what section. That's something that could be observed, but it's also at this point taking on this almost symbolic meaning. This sort of lack of emotional warmth, which is supporting this idea that there's some sort of, relationship, potentially traumatic relationship between the two figures. So I'm going to kind of show you how I would then translate some of what's happening here into some writing. And I'm going to give a couple of examples, and then hopefully we still have time for questions. Fortunately don't have the time up on my computer, but I hope, to be able to sort of have a conversation about all of this. But here we go. So I've sort of reorganized the worksheet as a list form. So we have the what, the why, and the tension region right here. And so this sentence is maybe a little bit dense. And again, like my writing is, expressing something about my work in my voice. Your writing is going to sound potentially a lot different, but it's just an idea. It's just an example. So my paintings explore fraught intergenerational dynamics through understated family portraits. So I kind of wanted to show you where all of this information was coming from. So I'll start with the what. So painting, so, telling the viewer directly that this is a painting, kind of showing them what they're looking at. And then portraits, coming directly from portraiture here. And then this idea of understated, I'm kind of taking it from this idea that the decor in this room is sort of sparse. And I could say, sparse family portraits, but I sort of liked the way understated sounded. I like the kind of sound of it better. And again, this is where creativity comes into play. We have the ability to sort of interchange words at this point and sort of like, allow our creativity to kind of drive what we're writing about. So feel free to sort of play around with words, play around with language here. And so over on the why portion here, so we have intergenerational showing directly in this sentence. And then this idea of intergenerational dynamics, basically just change the word relationship to dynamics. Again, I like the way that it sounded a little bit better. I think it sort of alludes to more action, or it's a kind of more active word, so I kind of replaced it. And then fraught here, and maybe this sentence is, the beginning of a paragraph. So there'll sort of be like more at play, but this fraught, this idea of the dynamics being fraught, is kind of alluding to this this trauma here. And you can kind of see that the second that I say fraught, it almost charges my work with kind of new meaning. And I think that's sort of the point here. That's the goal. Again, we're trying to direct the viewer to kind of seeing what's important to us as an artist. Of course, they can make their own interpretations, but again, we're kind of trying to kind of show them what's important to us. And then this idea of family is coming right from here, myself and my mother. And again, that could sort of be an aspect of the why, but it is directly shown in the painting, and we kind of want to help the viewer understand what's going on. So I'm going to take you through one example, and again, it's a bit dense, and I'm kind of trying to move things out of the way on my screen. So here, I'm interested in using portraiture to present dualities in familial structures. Works portraying myself and my mother function as commentaries on aging, conflicting and reflecting identities, and double self-portraits. Formal relationships emphasize emotional ones. The physical distance between subjects become palpable rifts in closeness. So again, a bit wordy, a bit dense, and again, we're kind of drafting here. This is just sort of an idea to get going. But I think again, I'm sort of getting at the idea of what I want to say. So if we break this guy down, again, you can kind of see that there's a balance between all of these different sections, and it's not necessarily natural to write like this, and I wouldn't, be so focused on making sure that, you have a certain number of this section and a certain number of that section, but it could be a good way to kind of go back and check and analyze, like, am I checking everything off? Am I sort of representing everything that my work is representing? So for the what section, going back over to the what, I'm saying it's portraiture, basically stating it, anchoring the reader or viewer to what they're seeing. And I'm talking about formal relationships, so just kind of the relationship between forms. And then also addressing that physical distance that's so important to me, and kind of the agenda of my painting between the subjects. So that's sort of all accounted for. And then again, with the why, the sort of commentary on aging is coming directly from, exploring the process of aging. And again, I'm just changing my words a little bit to sort of better express what I want to say. This idea of conflicting identities, kind of coming from the previous example of fraught dynamics. The second that I sort of charge the painting with this word of conflicting identities, it's almost bringing it to life. The painting's taking on a new life, and I think that's so important. And then just talking about the emotional realm, that sort of unseen realm. And then with the region of tension, these words are really just coming directly out of this exercise. So dualities, familial structures, myself and my mother, all of these things that can, both be seen visually in the painting and also connect to my why. And this bridge again is just, I can't sort of understate how important it is to sort of have these connections to not only the intention of you as the artist, the sort of unseen realm, but how that connects to what is actually shown in your work. This idea of reflecting it started to interest me a lot. So within this exercise, a new idea emerged, and hopefully it will for you too. This idea of a double self-portrait. So, as I'm looking at this work, as I'm thinking about this sort of mirroring effect, this sort of doubling that's happening, maybe I start to see this as a double self-portrait. So not only a portrait of myself, but kind of seeing my mother as, as myself in the future, seeing this sort of double identity thing sort of happening. And then kind of lastly, this idea of rifts and closeness. And that's basically restating physical distance between subjects in a different way. Rift is almost this sort of almost physical or geological kind of separation, but it also, in English, and it also sort of refers to like a rift in a relationship. So it's almost a play on words here. And then this idea of closeness is also almost a play on words. It's referring to, these two figures are sort of in proximity, sort of physical proximity, but then, the idea of being close to someone, this idea of closeness in a relationship. So again, like kind of having fun with my words in a sense, sort of allowing creativity and fluidity to be infused in my approach, and being open to this sort of process, open to different words, open to ideas sort of changing and developing in real time. And again, this is really about you as an artist, expressing what's interesting to you about your own work, and making sure that what is interesting to you, your core ideas are actually coming visually across in your work, and you're sort of connecting the dots for the audience. So, I do hope that you, like, some of these ideas are helpful. You can sort of pick and choose what feels right to you. But yeah, ultimately, I hope it sort of creates more understanding, more connection between, not only you and your audience and your audience and your work, but you and your work as well. So yeah, I think I'm good for questions. That's quite a mouthful, but I hope I'm sort of glad I got it all in one go.
Well, Stace, we do have a couple of questions from the chat, and then anyone else who
Cool.
wants to ask questions, we can open it up.
Sweet.
So Shirley Shu asks, as an artist writing my own work, is it advisable to start writing while creating the artwork? Basically pursuing two creative processes almost parallel.
That's such a good question. So my gut reaction is to say no. I think as artists, I think that you can certainly approach it that way and sort of like take notes and yeah, I think you can approach it that way, but I would say that this is sort of a practice. So everything that I sort of spoke about in the talk is sort of a practice in being observant about your own work. So I do see it as sort of an exercise to be done with work that sort of already exists, that you've already made, to be able to sort of sit in the room with it and be able to sort of analyze it as almost like a finished product that you're not going to touch. That's something that I, actually didn't think about, which is a great question. But, I think if you feel like the writing process is going to sort of not get in the way of what you would naturally intuitively do as an artist, like this is meant to kind of support and accompany your practice. It's not meant to sort of interfere or get in the way. So if you feel like you could do these sort of two things simultaneously, great. I know there's probably a lot of artists that wouldn't be able to sort of do it simultaneously. So I was sort of thinking about it as a way to sort of step back and sit back after creating or looking at older work. But certainly there's room to sort of reflect on your work as you're making it. Yeah. So that's sort of the long and short of my thoughts on that.
All right. The other question that came up, and there's another one that will follow. T. Coco asks, can you give us some examples of what artists have written about their work?
Can I provide examples about what is that the question?
Yes, it sounds like that's the question.
So, I would recommend going onto any sort of artist website that you know or look up to, and kind of look at what they've said about themselves. I sort of purposefully didn't come prepared with examples, because I feel that this is really about speaking with your own voice. It's about developing a relationship with your own work. And sometimes the more influence that we have from looking at other people's examples sort of hinders the process. And I think at this point, just like getting started and getting words on the page, it's really about what you want to say and how you want to say it. And simple is better. Like, I think that my writing is maybe a little bit dense and jargony, but I think that ideally you'll be saying it in sort of a simplified, clear way that's very direct. So you don't necessarily have to be a writer and an artist to write about your own work. You just have to be sort of comfortable with sort of, just sort of doing it. And I would say, the more simple, the better, the clearer, the better. But I did purposely not include examples of what artists have written about their work, just to sort of encourage you to sort of have your own voice with it.
Tanya V asks, well, first she says, amazing. Thank you so much, Stace. And the question is, what was the most challenging piece that you have written about, and what did you do to move through it?
I did a review of an exhibition about Chinese artists. It was a group exhibition about sort of Chinese contemporary artists who were referring back to sort of the history of communism. And I believe this was at Mass Art a few years ago. And I think the challenging part of writing about that for me was that I felt like I didn't have the sort of prerequisite knowledge to be writing about it. So in order to move through it, I did my research, and I also sort of took a step back and kind of saw, in order to not be really intimidated by the fact that I didn't feel like I had that sort of historical background knowledge, I kind of used the ideas that I was talking about in the presentation. This idea that, the first thing that you need to sort of acknowledge about the work is what is coming across. So starting from there, kind of working from the ground up, like, okay, what are these kind of showing to me? What are these presenting to me in real time? And then going into the sort of historical mechanisms behind it. And so working from there, and that definitely helped. So I do take my own advice in this sense. And yeah, it ended up being a great piece.
Stace Shirley says thanks and asks, can you talk a little bit about bio writing, especially for artists who don't have formal training around it?
I would say the same thing. I would say that if you have a lot of accolades, a bio can almost stand in for a resume, in a sense, where you're kind of just listing notable shows or awards or grants that you've received. On the flip side, if you don't have a whole sort of resume behind you, or you want to sort of focus on more biographical elements, I would say that, like, I would say make sure that you're, not going into backstory that doesn't sort of relate to your work. So, making sure that you're being sort of concise, so that the viewer doesn't whoever is reading it doesn't sort of get sidetracked. I think that there's sort of an instinct of artists who want to include a lot of background story and a lot of background information, but only some of that sort of relates to what you're doing at present. I would say that like the one big no-no of bio writing is the "ever since I was a child" statement. So like, ever since I was a child, I've always painted ever since I can remember. It's like, okay, unless your work is very specifically relating to that and is very clearly shown, I would say that that's something to leave out. And it's honestly something I see a lot, but I think that could be sort of applied to many people, not just artists, that sort of childhood statement.
Somewhat related question from Corey Ellis. Any advice for mission statements for a new small business?
I would definitely go back to, again, this idea of the what and the why. I'm not, well, I guess it depends on, maybe the nature of the small business, but just making sure that you're sort of balancing, what you have to offer as a business and then kind of why you're doing it. Obviously we don't all have attention spans to read multiple paragraphs. So also the more concise you can be, the more refined you can be, the better, sort of getting kind of straight to the point here. And obviously your mission statement, like the voice of your mission statement is something that you want to reflect, your business as a whole. So it could be, paying attention to whether you want it to sort of come across more formal or more conversational could have an influence on, what your buyer or your, clients, how your clients will perceive. So voice in that sense, in that mission statement, I think is an important element to sort of look at.
Tanya has a follow-up question. It's more of a personal nature. A huge challenge for me is writing about my work that was based on trauma. I've avoided writing about it because of re-traumatizing myself. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of thoughts on this, and this is something I didn't include in the workshop, but I have been thinking about a lot. So I would say that let's say your work is sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of inspired by, well, that's sort of poor way of putting that, but your work is you sort of make your work based on things that have happened to you in your past. Like, I think that the sort of residue of that experience is showing up in your work, but unless your work is, directly portraying that trauma, you don't need to, address what exactly happened to you. What you want to focus on is the emotions that are being conveyed because of that trauma. For instance, something really traumatic happened, and what's being actually conveyed in the work is loneliness. So sort of focusing on, again, what's actually visually coming across, what is the emotional state, and you don't need to, say that the exact thing that happened. You don't even need to say that it is revolving around your trauma unless it's a direct depiction of such. Paying attention to, again, the sort of residue of that experience that's appearing, rather than the event itself.
If there are no other questions, I want to thank you, Stace. I want to thank everyone for joining tonight's session. Tanya V says, love the word residue. Thank you so much. I had to get that last comment in.
Awesome.
That's tremendous questions.
Really, really amazing questions. Thank you so much. I can give Dina or Co-Creative this worksheet, the sort of what, why tension worksheet, and you all can distribute it to the group if that's helpful, and if that's something people would, would find, helpful to their writing practice as well. So
I will personally say that I look at it as being very helpful in terms of organizing thoughts and breaking things down. It's really like a it's visual brainstorming and using the structure of actually categorizing things and connecting things in a really cool visual way.
Right.
So I'm excited to take advantage of that, and I'm sure a lot of people here in the session are as well.
Thanks for joining us for the Co-Creative Sessions. Stay tuned for upcoming sessions and view previous sessions in the series by visiting the Co-Creative Center's events page at cocreativenb.org. The Co-Creative Sessions is funded by Mass Development TDI and the Barr Foundation as part of the TDI Creative Cities Initiative to boost arts-based economic development. This program is also supported in part by a grant from the New Bedford and Dartmouth Local Cultural Councils, local agencies which are supported by the Mass Cultural Council, a state agency. We look forward to seeing you at the next Co-Creative Session.